Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Daniel Franco, Managing Director of Synergy IQ and host of the Creating Synergy podcast. And today on the show, we have Louka Parry, CEO and founder of The Learning Future. Louka is a renowned expert in the field of education and has dedicated his career into improving the way we learn and grow. Louka opens the show with acknowledgement of country in the Pitjantjatjara language, a language that he learned after spending many years in Central Australia. Louka is a former teacher who became a school principal at just the age of 27 years old and worked globally to support thousands of educators and leaders to increase their positive impact. He speaks 5 languages and has visited over 80 countries and brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to this conversation. He also has an amazing TED Talk titled Words Can Change the World, How Language Deepens Connection, which has had over 33,000 views. In this episode, Louka and I discuss the powerful role of language in shaping and deepening our connections with others and the transformative impact that learning a new language can have on an individual and how it can help us to better understand and connect with people from different cultures and backgrounds. We also discuss the concept and the importance of being a global citizen and what great communication does in building bridges and creating more connected and compassionate community. Welcome back to the Creating Synergy podcast. Today on the show, I've been really looking forward to this, and we're going to start off a little bit different. We've got Louka Parry on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
I'm a big fan of your TEDx talk. It's got a lot of followers, so kudos.
Thanks.
Anyone
Thanks,
that
man.
wants to check it out.
A few years ago now, but
yeah,
it was fun.
I think it's just hits the mark on so many different things. So go check that out, and we'll talk about a lot of those topics today.
Great.
But in that, you started off talking. Now you talk 5 different languages, don't you, or thereabouts? One of them being you can speak in Aboriginal language because you spent some time in Central Australia. Can you do an acknowledgement of the country for us?
Oh, wow. Well, I can acknowledge, I mean, we're in Ghana Yarta, right?
Correct.
So, and I should have prepped a Ghana welcome because I'd love to learn Ghana. This is where I grew up.
Okay, so there's different. So this.
No,
is
so yeah, so, Ghana Yarta, Ghana mi yonangadlo dumpinthi. I want to pay my respects to the Ghana, custodians of the land that we meet on here today. But I spent a long time in the Anangu Pitjantjatjara Yankunytjatjara lands. And so the languages that I've been really, I think, privileged to be taught by Anangu and by elders and by educators is Pitjantjatjara and the minority dialects Yankunytjatjara.
So whereabouts in Central Australia?
In the northwest corner of South Australia, on the border of the Northern Territory, Western Australia. Mono alaji ngayolo wankanyi Pitjantjatjara. Mono ngayonya Chana nintini ngaylo mono ngaylo warakorinyi mulava palo ngaylo pukulpa wanka chanampa wankanjako mono kulinjako alaji. So that's some of the Pitjantjatjara
Explain
language.
That to me. What did you
I was just
say?
saying, I feel very lucky to have been taught this language, and this is what it sounds like. I spent 5 years in that part of South Australia. It's where I went out as a brand new, squeaky clean teacher in my first kind of full-time teaching role, and it had a profound impact not just on my linguistic interests but also on how I conceive of learning systems, how I conceive of well-being, how I conceive of leadership and strategy, and even more profound concepts around what does it mean to be human, what matters most, what's success, what can we learn from the oldest continuing culture in the world, what kind of systems can we understand around literally living in a sustainable, regenerative way. And I think these are many principles that our Cartesian Newtonian kind of current market economy is kind of forgotten about. And so we're seeing, I think, the evolution of the business world appropriately. But again, if we return to the holistic indigenous worldviews, there's quite a lot of wisdom there, I think, that we can pay attention to. And I've been doing my best as a non-Aboriginal person, as a Greek-Welsh hybrid, as I like to reflect, right? To do my part as an Australian and to realise actually it's an incredible strength that we have here. And there's still more reckoning and reconciliation and recognition to come. But, if we get this right, we can become such a beautiful, multicultural, dynamic, holistic nation. And that can go from the local all the way up to the national level.
I love it. You talked about learnings from the elders and from the history. And you said if we can learn that, what is that? What are you talking about when you said we can learn some of the their customs and their learnings and experiences over time?
Well, I would point to some of the indigenous theorists, educators, wisdom holders in this space. I was lucky to learn directly from elders in the community where I was working as an educator, and then subsequently the school leader for a time. But there are some wonderful people talking about this. Tyson Yunkaporta, wrote a great book called Sand Talk, Why Indigenous Thinking Can Change the World. Maybe save the world might even be the subtitles, to be honest with you. And then there's phenomenal colleagues that we can see and learn from. Stan Grant, I think, puts forward such a powerful vision of what Australia could be if we have the courage to kind of look at where we are and what's actually happened in terms of where we've come from. And so this idea of like remembering the parts of who we are to come up with a kind of more human-centered model is at the core of my work, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's core of your work. The idea of synergizing, like how do you bring together all these different aspects, the IQ, the EQ, the AQ, all those different knowledge sets, all those different skill sets, and really critically, the different identities that we also hold, the intersectionality. Because it's who we are, what we can do, and what we know in that order of importance, I would suggest. And the challenge, of course, in my work is that both in the workplace, in terms of organizational culture, and also in terms of the way we've designed, and I say we, the way schooling systems were designed some 150 years ago, is that we've placed all the attention on this obsession around the cognitive. What do you know? Tell me the question. But really, it's actually, there are better questions that I think a lot of wonderful schools already are operating on. It's not just invention and innovation, it's actually remembering, in my view. And that's both in the metaphorical and the literal sense. How do you remember things, right? So what's the point of being super successful? And we can have this conversation around success, right?
Yeah.
Super successful, and you look at a billionaire and they're on their fourth marriage, they're estranged from their children, they're on a whole bunch of, antidepressant medication. That's not success.
No.
That's one narrow metric. And so how do we expand that? How socially connected do you feel? Can you emotionally regulate? Do you feel called to a purpose higher than the one that you might think as an individual? The transcendent piece. And that can resonate for anyone that has a faith-based tradition. But even if you don't, as an agnostic or atheist, like, where do you derive your purpose? What's your life for? Like, all these questions, right, is what we grappled with as a team of educators working in that particular place. And so that was my entry into the workforce.
Yeah, wow.
And so it was quite different from the joke I say, Daniel. It's like I almost took a job 15 minutes down the road from where I grew up in Southern Adelaide, in Westbourne Park, right? Represent. And I took one 15 hours down the road, right? Yeah. And, it's two turns, mate. 2 turns. You get to Port Augusta, turn right.
Yep.
And then you go past Marlin, and you turn left.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's the journey of a 15 hour. But so for me, a really transformative, particularly as a white man, I understood for the first time the concept of whiteness, which again, for so many of us, we don't understand that actually we have identity as well. So
I've heard you say this. I want to hear you talk about the concept of whiteness, because you were fish out of water in a different world. In that you were part of the minority when you go into Central Australia. What did you feel in that space? What does the concept of whiteness mean to you, and what you learn in that time?
Well, it's such a great question. I would say, I want to respond with my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes, right? Yeah. I'm a real quote kind of guy. Yeah. I think you'll pick this up. Yeah, I know it's going to be, there's a lot coming, I apologize. But it's by Carl Jung, right? Yeah. And he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is the whole piece. It's like, what's the unknown unknowns in our lives? What are our blind spots? What don't we realize? And I think I grew up, middle class family, psychiatrist father, educator mother, both born overseas. First in my family, we were born in Australia. So I had this real sense around my connection to Australia. But I remember traveling around the world as an 18-year-old. I lived in Dublin. That was a real rite of passage for me as a young man, playing Gaelic football. And then, backpacking across the continent. I'm saying I'm an Aussie. And I realized at that point that I hadn't really had an education around the First Nations history, like the true history of Australia. The broad history of Australia that has multiple perspectives, many of which are still being played out, in public discourse now, right? In the media and in universities and beyond. So there's something incredibly powerful, I think, when we remove ourselves from a situation where we are perhaps part of a dominant culture, or we are certainly part of a dominant race, or religion or creed, and we put ourselves into a space where, oh, wow, actually, I'm different. I stand out. That's such a powerful experience for me as a young man that, I'm Greek and Welsh, right? But
Yeah.
I have curly hair. That's kind of the piece there.
That's right.
But so realizing I'm the only white guy on the football team, for example, and of course
that photo of you in the football team.
Oh mate, well, it's really profound for me because I'm like, all of a sudden the whole opposition team, Puka Magpies in particular, they're always a formidable opposition, But when we're playing for Mimley Blues, I'm being targeted because I stand out. And so it's like, get the white guy.
Yeah.
And that's like just a glimpse for me as someone that comes from a privileged background in many respects in terms of intersectionality, to go, oh, wow, this is a glimpse into what it might feel like to be a minority in another space. And so having that experience transformed, I think, my ability to take perspective, to be empathetic, and also my own worldview. It's like realizing that I went in and it's like, oh, this is what it is. No, it's not. That's the construct that you're operating with. And that's just the culturescape. And so in my own kind of, I would say, consciousness development, to be honest, or Robert Keegan's models out of Harvard, the adult development, like how do we be deliberately developmental? I'm thinking, oh, wow, okay, so I thought that this was the way it was, or it is, but actually that's just because my vantage point is here. So one other way that I'll put this is, I used to say I work in the middle of nowhere. And all the time, it's out the back, it's out in the outback.
Yeah.
It's in the outback. It's like, 15 hours down the... That's such a metrocentric perspective.
Yeah, it is.
Of course it is. And so for people that have had thousands of generations of continuous cultivation and of the land there, connection to country, that's the middle of everything. And so it's the middle of nowhere, middle of everything. Of course it is. And so again, I was so challenged, not just in trying to be a good educator and inspire young people and, interact with the community and learn the local languages. But that is my best answer to your question around whiteness. It's like any other aspect. Are you conscious of that? Are you conscious of who you are fully, all the different aspects that make you who you are? Because when you are, the more conscious you are, in my view, the more able you are to act deliberately in ways that uplift, that humanize. You don't need to project your blind spots onto others. And that, I think, makes a great leader, makes a great CEO, makes a great school principal, by the way, as well, I hope. And that was a really big couple of years of my life as well, stepping into that role quite young. So, yeah, I think it's the journey for all of us, right?
So you're the minority when you're in Central Australia. What's the suburb? Is it like...
it's called Mimley.
Mimley, okay. So
it's a community.
Yeah, community.
One of 9 across the Anangu, Pitjantjatjara Yankunytjatjara lands.
Okay. And like we're skipping a few years, right? But I want to get the learning here, and specifically of the whiteness piece and those learnings that you took away. You come back to metropolitan Adelaide or South Australia, and do you behave differently? Do you have a different vantage point looking now? Do you walk down the street holding yourself differently? Is there anything that you took coming back, or that you kept when you came back, that you acted in a different way? Did you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, of course. I can talk to the changes I feel I've undergone, but I can't run the AB experiment. Of course, because
that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I was so much more open-minded. I would say even I'd become humbled a little by my experiences there, not least of all in terms of like how hard life can be for some people and how intergenerational trauma can manifest and what the responsibility of an organization or an institution like a school might be, because at its best, a school in any community in the world is representative of the best parts of that community, the collective dream, the collective vision. And its worst, it's just perpetrating the same kind of outdated systems and models and structures and power dynamics that mean a lot of young people leave school saying, I didn't like school. In fact, I don't like parts of myself, and I know what I'm not good at. That's I think the legacy model that we've inherited. And so that's our responsibility to do something about that. And there's some incredible work happening nationally and internationally to do that. So I guess that's the first thing. I'm more open-minded in terms of taking perspective. I think languages as well, for anyone that speaks multiple languages. And I learned all of mine as an adult, by the way. I was monolingual at 18. And it took for me, for a couple of moments overseas in Europe where you've got people speaking 4 languages, code switching seamlessly. And you think, gee, I probably should have paid more attention to this. To be, global citizenship really is a key focus of education systems and, frankly, nation states as well. It has to be. How do we interact in this globally connected world that's increasingly connected? So I think that piece is what comes to me. Open-mindedness, ability to take perspective, but also to kind of know who I am. I mean, in linguistics, we call this contrast and compare in language acquisition. So, when you have your own language, what you do is you take a second language and you're contrasting and comparing against the linguistic data that you already have. And that's been how I've learned so many subsequent languages. You always I learned more about English by learning Spanish and modern Greek, for example.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I mean, this is going to be one of the questions that I have. I mean, I can't even speak English properly, right? Like, if you think about the slang that I would use and the lack of vocabulary that I might have, I work really hard on my vocabulary, but I'm still nowhere near where I need to be, and not to the level that you are. Why am I concentrating on other languages when I can't even get the one I'm speaking right?
Well, I mean, because it's a false dichotomy.
Okay.
By learning another language, your own grasp of your own language will increase, will improve, because you understand why concepts are the way they are, why noun phrases, why structures occur in a particular way. Prepositions in English are postpositions in other languages. And so all of a sudden you start to pay more attention to at, to, with, by, from, because it determines the relationships between ideas. And so you start to realize, and to be honest, Daniel, why I think I care about this, if I go, and I've done all this inner work, to be honest with you, why I care about this so much, I feel, is for two reasons. Number one, when I was a young boy in primary school, I was terrible at English. I remember, I think I missed out on getting my pen license.
Yeah.
And for me, you're like, well, it doesn't matter. But, for a small kid, that's really significant.
The day I got my pen license.
I know. Well, I'm like, did I even get mine? I can't remember. And I had a lisp as well. Yeah. So I went to a speech path as well as a young kid. And I remember practicing 7 slippery snakes slither slowly southwards. Over and over again as just part of my memory. So I had this idea that I wasn't good at language. And then also when I was 16, my papu, my Greek grandfather, died of a heart attack suddenly. And I realized, because he had emigrated here, I think in his 40s. And so his English wasn't great. And my Greek was non-existent outside of being able to pronounce Louka, even though I was probably not even pronouncing that correctly back in the day, So those two things happened, and I think subsequently I've kind of over-indexed towards language. I've done a master's in applied linguistics. I'm just obsessed about learning new linguistic data, because for me, languages are an incredible way to take perspective, to empathize, to step into the shoes of another human being and see from their vantage point. It's the primary technology that we use to get ideas across, to even understand our world. So that's kind of why I'm so passionate.
Oh my God, I've got like 5,000 questions. Your bapu, when he passed away, that was a profound moment, and you've said that that's a turning point, which is, taking you down the career path that you have. I think I'm not a person that lives in regret too much, but one thing that I wish I had done was learn how to speak proper Italian. My family's Italian. They all immigrated here.
Sure.
Back in the 50s, 60s. And I never got the opportunity to sit down and have an in-depth conversation with my grandparents, all 4 of them.
No.
Yeah. And I still to this day, sort of wish, because Synergy IQ, the work we do, we work, in complex change in that space, but it's really always focused on core human behavior, right? And that's, when we work in change, our specialty is the human behavior aspect of the change, not the technology, not anything else. And so now I've become obsessed with human behavior, and so I always wish that I was able to create a different view of my grandparents based on who they were as individuals and their behaviors, as opposed to what I saw on the surface level. So I really do understand that turning point. For me, I was a lot younger when my grandparents passed away, so I missed out on that opportunity. But I really want to talk about, something you just said now as well was language is, is from an empathic point of view, and you can really connect and learn from other people. When you talk about language, I'm quoting, you've said language is our superpower. It allows us to communicate and connect. And that's some of the videos and YouTube stuff that you've got going on. You've said that. When you talk about language, are you talking about all that's involved with language, like behavior, tonality? Is that what you're referring to, or just the language itself, the words itself?
No, I'm referring to what underpins that, I would say. I mean, and to be honest, I often now say learning is our superpower.
Yeah.
Because it's through learning and the curiosity of learning, which is built into our neural architecture. It's like we are born to learn.
Yeah.
We are born learners.
Well, I've heard this saying: if you, what happens to a tree when it stops growing?
Starts dying.
It starts dying, right? And so that's. Yeah. I think you're 100% true. Learning and growth is core to what we do.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think what's really important is the language that we use, right, to get it. So on the one hand, we often conflate learning, education, and schooling, and learning to me is an intrinsic human trait. And so the superpower is, how do we tap into that deep curiosity that we all have as children that sadly for some of us becomes, dampened or doused by the kind of rigid systems in which we operate, be they workplaces or be they school systems, right? So how do we kind of nurture and cultivate and almost protect that ability to learn? And then of course, the modern world, and this is Alvin Toffler, the illiterate of the 21st century aren't those that can't read and write. It's those that are unable to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I mean, I tell you what, working in language and literacy, it helps if you can read and write. In fact, it's critical because only then can you be truly autodidactic and become a full self-learner. But those are the floor, not the ceiling, as the saying goes. So it's kind of the capabilities work is what I'm really interested in. How do you continually evolve? How do you let go, allow part of you to die so that something else can be born? Like that idea of reinvention, especially in the kind of future of work conversation that we're all having. There's no longer a career ladder. I'm sure you can look at your career, I can look at mine. If I can even call it a career, I don't know. It's now a career web. And particularly if you're a zillennial, coming out into the workforce. Gen Alphas, when they finish school in whatever it is, 9 or 10 years' time, they're going to enter a very different place where actually their capacity to learn is the superpower. And of course, how do you learn? Well, it's through communication. It's through understanding the relationships between concepts and constructs. And that's a language piece, in my view. If you can't communicate, you can't lead. There's no doubt. It's one of the key pillars for leadership.
Do you think, so going back when early in this podcast, 10 minutes ago, you said...
Is that all it's been?
You said we can learn from the elders past and present, right? And we'll learn from their way of living. And you said it's who we are, what we do, and what we know. Do you think if we approach everything and then use, the word curiosity, and I believe, a superpower of mine is the ability to be curious, unlearn and relearn sort of thing. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Do you think that learning from who we are, is that the foundation that we should all start on first before we go to learn anything else? Does that give you a strong base? I mean, because the schooling system right now goes straight to what we know. In reception, year 1, year 2, early in those schooling careers, is it too early to learn about who we are? Like, what does that look like for you?
I like, so I've done a lot of work in design, right? Yeah. And I don't mean graphic design. I mean kind of systems design or learning design and design thinking through Stanford and a whole range of other work. So I'm really interested in the questions we ask and what the starting point is. And you're quite right. The current kind of, I'm going to say legacy schooling systems, right? Because we've inherited them. Like we actually didn't design them. Yeah. We've kind of,
it's off the
Henry
Henry
Ford
Ford
given
model,
to us.
Isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Henry Ford. I mean, the Committee of 10. There's a whole bunch of how it's been standardized. And, it was standardized to reculture an entire generation for the Industrial Revolution, actually the second Industrial Revolution. And now, of course, it's no longer fit for purpose. It's kind of palliative in some ways. And so what we're seeing is the emergence of new systems, new practices that are really kind of being born as part of that change. So that piece on on identity is something that is kind of, when we think about what's true across the course of our lives, it's who we are. What we know needs to change, and even our skill sets need to adapt. So if we're too attached to our knowledge set, that's going to place us in a rigid position. People talk about the knowledge economy. I don't think we're in the knowledge economy at all anymore. I think we're in a creation economy. It's actually what you do with what you know. If you know, Tony Wagner's work out of Harvard, right? It's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. And I just add another layer to that. I say, yes, it's what you know and it's what you do with what you know, but actually it's who you are as you do things with what you know. And that deeper level is, of course, the most important level. It's how do I feel about myself? This is why I'm such a proponent for social and emotional skills, or sometimes called problematically soft skills, right? They're human skills. It's actually, how do I communicate? How do I have a relationship with myself, with others? How do I make ethical decisions? I mean, that's the foundation upon which our skill set. What, technical skill? Yeah, no worries. I'll take a LinkedIn course. I'll do a micro credential. I'll go through edX or whatever, go to Harvard, do a micro course, a fellowship, or a macro degree if I need to, although probably less, increasingly less, because we're looking at the way the kind of the future of higher education is transforming. So that piece on who we are, I think, is the great question. And I think, Daniel, what we struggle to do is get beyond small talk. Right? We start with the polite, and then we listen to respond. Right? There's some great work, particularly out of MIT, from Otto Scharmer and Theory U, which you might know of. It's the 4 levels of listening. So, is it just factual listening? It's like, or is it, do we want to go all the way down empathic listening, or do we want to get to generative listening? Which is actually where we're holding space to allow the emergence of a new idea, a new process, a new product, a new service, a new possibility. And so often we're just like, I'm waiting for you to finish so I can speak. Because it's not listening anymore. So even all
Simon Garfunkel said it in their song, right? There's a line in one of their
Sound
songs.
of Silence? Or something?
Yeah, the Sound of Silence, right? People speak.
It's a good track.
Yeah, it's a ripper, but it's something that I always think about, and it's people speaking, people talking without speaking, and then it's people listening without hearing, right? And that's
that's you describing Twitter, by the way.
Yeah,
everybody yelling, no one listening.
Correct. Yeah.
And so this is, again, I think just the modes of communication in the modern world have become so much about broadcast and much less about the holding of space, which is why, again, if we come back to, let's think how we've done this in the past before we got so busy that we, our calendars are like rocks, completely solid. It's, just how do we sit in circle? How do we stand around a whiteboard and go, all right, what's possible here? Not necessarily what's the problem, but what's the possibility? And this is some of Charlie Leadbeater's work. He's a phenomenal systems thinker and educator from whom I've learned a lot. It's, it's like, how do we move from problem to possibility? And as an aspiring education futurist in particular, I really like visiting the future, right? Return to the present and then powerfully develop intentional action, aka a strategy, to try to create your preferred future. But to do that properly, we have to think possibility, not just problem and fix it. And I think this manifests across government, it manifests across big corporates, because it's slower but more powerful to really listen well.
Start a podcast if you want to get better at listening. I'm telling you right now, when I actually even remember, I'm a very self-reflective person. And
I can see that.
I remember so vividly in my mind thinking, I need to get better at listening. I overspeak, I cut people off, and it's not because I thought I was ever rude, in the sense that I don't care about what you're saying, therefore I'm not going to listen. It's the way my brain worked. I could figure out what you're saying, therefore I'm happy. Let's now move on, right? And I've through the idea of the podcast, you become a leader in a business, and you have to become a better listener. You have to, otherwise, the alternative is not the right option, where you staff engagement or the above, right? But the idea of where I was before, and this is just a learning that I've got out of this, is when I could read the play and I could already figure out what they were going to say. I was like, okay, how do we quicken this up? I actually wasn't giving space to the person. I wasn't allowing them to play in their mind what they were calibrating as they were speaking, right? Because we often, and you lose the power of thought, you lose the power of iteration. So holding the space is what you said before, of giving the person the opportunity to speak, is so powerful. Because there's some things, and I cut people off every now and again in the podcast too, because I really just want to talk about that point because I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a real power in letting someone holding the space like you are doing now.
Keep going. I've got many questions for you, Daniel. But I think that's very powerful. Like even just to pause there for a moment, like that is an enormous, I think, piece that is missing from the way we've designed our human systems. Workplaces, schools, higher education, like lots of the different settings. How might we is the question, right? Together, it's a design question.
Yeah, correct.
How might we create more space for deep listening and actually get down to the true potential, the true possibilities that exist for us as a team, doing whatever the work is in service of this mission? And that's a real powerful piece. It's also just triggered a thing for me that I often think about, which is we often focus on the output, right? Which is teaching. And so as an educationalist now, and as someone that's spent most of my life in education, I'm really curious about why we focus on the output and really what we've been learning, what great educators have always done, and great schools, and I think great leaders have also always done, is to focus on the outcome. And that's to realize it's probably just an ego trip to think I can teach you something, Daniel. Let me tell you how it's going to be, right? And some of those very old school leadership, great man models of leadership, right? That go way back to kind of Napoleon and the generals and that kind of stuff. It's like, let me give you some advice. No, that doesn't work. It doesn't work because I can't teach you anything. You can only learn. And yeah, I can be directive and I can be explicit and I can use a whole suite of different communications tools or learning sciences to make that happen. But ultimately, do the synapses in your brain change because of our conversation? And so that's a different way of since rather than thinking of teaching and learning, it's learning via teaching, right? And it's learning via experience, right? John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflection on experience. And that's really powerful too. So how do you do reflection? You've got to hold space, ask some questions. How did everyone feel about that? What's present for us? What resonates? And particularly as we think about the increasing kind of automation of the workforce, like that's our deep humanity on show when we're doing that kind of work. That stuff can't be, not yet, pushed to OpenAI to do or pushed to, Boston Dynamics robotics to kind of just get going because it's not routine. It's actually emergent. It's an emergent phenomenon. And I think that's the true beauty of working in a human system that elevates the humanness that we all have, that multidimensionality. Because then we feel pretty aligned. We're creating something brand new. We're being novel, truly novel, in the way that we're thinking about our next steps and our learning as an organization. So the last point I'll make on this, because I think it's so powerful, is that if any organization doesn't consider themselves a learning organization, they're already a few decades behind. It's actually the human beings in the system that we've created, a company structure, whatever the structure, right? In some ways, it's almost irrelevant. It's like, what's the capacity for them to evolve and grow? How much do we invest in our leaders in particular, but all human beings in terms of their own experience, both in terms of their technical outer skills and also their inner social and emotional skills? And you've got to do those two things simultaneously. Otherwise, you get highly technical people that actually can't interact properly. This is why we introduced, by the way, an interview for medicine a few decades ago, because we had all these phenomenal technical people, but they had no bedside manner. Yeah. And so it's this idea, actually, we want to try to be balanced, more human in the way that we show up at work, at school, in life.
Love it. I love it. You talked about then you just talked about learning and let me get my words right. Learning through the art of teaching, learning through the art of listening. Someone can't be taught, they can only be, so you can't teach someone something, they can only learn. Then what I'm hearing from that comment, and you've obviously done a lot of study and research in this space, you're a thought leader in this space, that tells me that the education system's wrong. That's kind of that's how I'm hearing it.
Yeah. Well, I would say here's the way I reflect on this, Daniel. It's that the education system isn't broken. It functions as it was designed.
Okay.
That is no longer fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Because it was designed to dehumanize people. to standardize us, to be replaceable parts within a particular business model, to be literally on a factory line. And you understand why that it was designed that way. That was literally the design challenge for these industrialists that were creating these
we were living in, right?
These mass education systems. And so now, particularly with automation, particularly when you look at any of the predictions from PwC, from the Future of Humanity Institute around the shifting workforce, clearly it's not fit for purpose. And so how might we create a future fit education system? That really is at the core of most of my work. It's, how do we rehumanize it? How do you build those social and the emotional capabilities from birth alongside the academics critically? And even add in the physical and the spiritual. And then what you have a multidimensional, whole person-centered education model, which is what great education has always been. But again, what's success? Well, if it becomes a single number after 13 years of schooling, which it is here, which by the way is a national ranking against every other year 12, and we're only one of the few countries in the world to do it that way, right? That creates a narrowing of the model. Yong Zhao, who's an educational innovator and author, calls it the sausage maker model of education. So put all this diversity in and we'll just get a sausage. I mean, he's provocative, right? And so the question is easy to say education's broken and blah, blah, blah. But every single day, I mean, there's 1 million teachers in this country in different kind of contexts working really hard to inspire young people and adult learners with the skills, the knowledge and the mindset, maybe even the kind of self-concept. How do they feel about who are they? They're that self-knowledge and understanding, so that they can go and lead a really productive life, contribute to the economy, contribute to their community, and thrive. And so I'm cautious with this whole education is broken or, stronger language, which many people use. It's not fit for purpose.
It's not.
But we've got people working really hard, doing their best. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could liberate them a bit more, to do that work more powerfully? And that's partially that we need to elevate the status of what it means to be an educator, because it's the profession that creates all other professions. We've all, I would say, been inspired by an amazing teacher in our lives. And we've all seen the teachers that are super overworked and slightly jaded and are projecting their own fatigue and anxiety onto others. And so we need to shift the system so it's more human for everybody. And if we do that, I think then we're entering kind of the post-industrial age. And the post-industrial, we are in an education renaissance. There's no doubt about that. It's exciting, incredibly exciting. And goodness me, there's a lot of work to do. So we'll do it together, though.
I love what you said about there's always a teacher. Everyone that's come on this podcast, I think we've had David Fogarty on recently, who's the founder of Udi, which is now $400 million
really successful
international business.
Amazing.
He was talking about it's one of the teachers that sparked interest in him and actually took a liking to him. I'll never forget, I had one teacher, not that it had a massive impact on me, but it had an impact on what I love and the way I think about things. And I walked into it, I was a bit of a larrikin, I was a bit of a...
What?
No. Well, I think I was.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Most other people really thought I was just a dickhead. But I remember I walked into class. It was the first year. It was year 10.
Yeah.
And he's probably listening. I'm connected with him on LinkedIn. He may be listening. His name's Rick Samariva. And I walked in and I don't know why I did it, but I just remember I walked in. I went, Miss Samariva, Mr. Rick Samariva. Like I started singing a song. And he goes, "Excuse me, your name?" I said, "Oh, my name's Daniel Franco." He goes, "Mr. Franco, sit up the front, right? Until I say you can move." I stayed there for the whole year. But he was my year 10 science teacher. And from that, I was a C student, talking about grades. I was a C student, became an A student, and had a love for science after that. I just absolutely, I consume scientific, I'm obsessed. But I didn't get into the world of science. So that's interesting. I wanted to talk about, because you talked about this sausage factory and on the TER number that we have as a grading system. ATAR now, it was ETER when
Mate, it's showing our age.
Yeah. What was your score?
92.8.
Yeah, so you were smart.
Well, this is how I reflect on it, right? I could play a game that actually meant I could maximize that score into the top, 8%. But as Howard Gardner told us like decades ago, multiple intelligences. Like the fact that we see academics as smart is partially the issue.
Yeah, correct.
And this idea of
this is
divergence, neurodivergence.
Well, this is novelty, my point. I got 60 something. I think 69. I got as my TR. I've been embarrassed to say that my whole life because puts me in. I didn't even get into the uni course that I wanted to, so I didn't even go to uni. I thought, that course is only like a human movement course or something like that. That course is only 70. I'll be right. Like that's easy to get. I got 69, missed out. I only put one course down. So I never went to uni, and then I got into business.
Right.
You know, thankfully it's led me in the right direction. And
Seems to have, mate. Yeah.
But I think the learning aspect, one thing that I always has as a skill set was being able to communicate, being able to hold a conversation. I had confidence in my own ability to talk to someone, and that put me in sales, and that kind of I then sort of grew into that world. So
this is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. First of all, because we should have more of those conversations. You know, we all feel a bit, oh, we got to keep up appearances or whatever, you know. But there's that wonderful cartoon. I'm sure many of your listeners listening now have seen. It's this idea. It's a tree, and you've got in front of the tree an elephant, a giraffe, a lion, a turtle, and a monkey. And you say, all right, everybody, let's see who's successful. Climb the tree.
Yeah.
And of course, so what we do is we lose the incredible diversity of skill, of possibility, of passion. Yeah. We kind of prune it away from our young people. And that's because of the legacy system that says this is what success is. Yeah. Success is an ATAR, which, by the way, only 1 in 4 people in Australia use an ATAR to go to university.
Oh, really?
1 in 4. And that's of the people that go to university. Yeah. So think about that. Like, we have a single metric that's actually corrupting the entire system from the senior secondary downwards. And so the future of learning in my book is something akin to lifelong kindergarten, which is also a very good book, by the way.
Okay. Lifelong kindergarten.
Lifelong kindergarten. It's the idea of cultivating the capabilities across the lifespan. And yeah, don't get me wrong. This is not we sit in a circle and just like play in the sandpit. This is rigorous work. This is rigorous. It's designed. There's stretch. There's challenge. But as soon as we start to standardize, and particularly do exams, mate, when's the last time you did an exam running a successful company?
Never.
Like a closed book exam. Yeah. But so here's the thing, right? When you think about
it's
what we call...
And the amount of nerves that you get from it.
Mate, so what we call...
The closest thing would be probably a job interview.
Yeah, sure. Sure, where you have so you can't access additional resources in that particular point of time. That's fair. But of course, so rarely we're having in dialogue for an assessment in our systems. What we call collaboration in the business world, we call speaking out of turn, disruption in schools. What we call sharing resources, we call cheating in school. Yeah. Right, isn't that interesting? It's just interesting for us to note that, because I really see, if we're having this conversation in 10 years' time, we are having a different conversation about what's actually going on in our learning systems. And we're probably talking less and less about schools, in my view, and more about learning ecosystems. So this whole idea, and I'm attached to some of this fantastic work happening out of the US called the Learning Economy Foundation. And the whole idea there is how do you create sovereignty, mobility, and equity? So eventually, I think what we're going to have is a verifiable credential wallet. We thought it was going to be on blockchain, probably doesn't need to be, right? But the whole idea is like, then you have all of your capabilities with you. You own your own data. And that means all the micro-credentials, your learner profile, which, by the way, South Australia is leading the nation in that work through the SACE board. That's the idea of actually taking the ATAR and putting it alongside a more holistic picture of who you are, what you can do, and what you know. Right, those 3 aspects. Right, it's a more human picture. And I guess, like, if you haven't picked up the trend, like, I'm a bit obsessed. I know you're obsessed by some science. I'm obsessed by the idea of humanizing our social systems. How do you do that? Because that's what a great culture is. So you step in and you feel seen, heard, and valued, and you're more able to do extraordinary work to your best capacity every single day. And that's what the work is, right? Yeah. That's what we want a school to be. It's what we want a high-performing company to be, is one that's deeply human, not one that's kind of, everyone is scrambling or trying to, maintain a status piece. It's just a waste of time, So
what does a deeply human culture look like?
Well, so I literally feel like, so here's a reflection for me. Like, we are emotional beings that think. We're not thinking beings that feel. I don't know where that quote's from, but I'm sure it's a quote somewhere. I love it. Yeah. Right? And so this idea is, what's the affective space? And this is what we know from Google's work on psychological safety, for example. What's the most high-performing teams in that research? They found the number 1 predictor was if the team feels safe to fail, to say something, without fear of being kind of reprimanded. Yeah. So that deeply human is where you're seen as an emotional, social, and cognitive being. And let's add physical. You can move around, as opposed to having a body to move your brain around. Like actually, embodiment is another big piece.
You're not a vessel.
No, you're not. No, it's not just about knowledge again, because this is, as my colleague and friend Dr. Jean Clinton would say, we've got this tyranny of cognitive obsession where it's like, you're smart, you're not smart. You have knowledge, you don't have knowledge. Like that is such a simplistic way to look at the world. Like we're Venn diagrams. Here's the thing I say all the bloody time, Daniel. We are Venn diagrams, not spreadsheets.
Yeah.
We're Venn diagrams, not spreadsheets. So a fully human culture is one that realizes our emotional tone. It cultivates social connectedness. And of course, it stretches us intellectually and cognitively. It's not about this either or. Are we doing well-being now? Are we doing learning now? That is a non-starter to me. These things are completely entwined, particularly if we think about the purpose of, I was going to say learning. I might just say life. What's the purpose of life? To thrive, to contribute something.
To flourish.
Absolutely. Like that really is the purpose. And until we can put that at the center of both our learning systems and our economic systems, we're going to continue to, I think, walk a pretty fine line with existential collapse, as we're seeing with all the overshoot work that unfortunately is getting kind of worse and worse, from floods to fire to famine. I mean, it's kind of scary time in many respects. Yeah.
I want to just touch on the Excel spreadsheet versus the Venn diagram. I think one, and I speak purely from self here, right? And actually want to learn so I can improve. You mentioned before about looking at the ATAR score, and I said, "Oh wow, you're smart," right? Like, and then you said that's a simple way of thinking, and which has got my brain ticking now. I'm not saying that I'm not putting words in your mouth that you think I'm a simple person, but we'll take that on board and talk that about off there.
do the inner work about that,
man. But I think the point I'm really interested in is the Excel spreadsheet to the Venn diagram, because I associate myself as a black and white person. I don't play in grey very well. And I always have these conversations with my business partner, my business coach, mentors, whoever it might be. I'm always saying, well, how do I be a better father and then manage a very successful, high earning revenue, whatever it might be, humanized culture business?
Sure.
How do I do that? I can't be one or the other. Like I have to put time and effort. I have to sacrifice. You hear all the hustle stories. If you're putting time and effort into business, then you talked about the billionaire that's unhappy for marriages, all this sort of stuff. And then I think one time someone pointed out to me, they said, Daniel, Roger Federer is all I'm going to say. I'm like, talk to me about that. And they said, Roger Federer has achieved all that you can achieve as one of the best tennis players in the world and took his family everywhere with him. If someone at that elite level can do it, then you can too. Just find a way in which you can do it. And so I want to ask the point and the question of how do we move away from the Excel spreadsheet to the Venn diagram? You look at engineers have this sort of linear way of thinking. There's so many different... it's one that I'm really struggling and trying to grapple with because my brain automatically goes to the black or white. How do I position myself to think in the Venn diagram?
It's wonderful reflection. I think it's from Bertrand Russell, and he said the definition of intelligence is being able to hold two conflicting views in mind without accepting either one.
Oh, yeah.
And so this idea of us having to go black or having to go white in some ways limits us, because like to think of life as certain in any way is kind of a self-delusion. Right? Like we've got no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. We've got no idea. So I feel like it's how do we navigate ambiguity? And this is what I've learned through my work at the D School at Stanford, is they do a lot of work on building the capability to navigate ambiguity. It's like, okay, we don't know. So how do we do that? Well, we can put this forward as a thesis or a strategy, and then we kind of have to let go and be quite adaptable, right? This is the whole as you would know, the whole rise of AQ and adaptability quotient or intentional adaptability quotient, all that kind of way. Agility, et cetera, right? Agile sprints, blah, blah, blah. It's all still so much there. But so I really feel like so if you think about your life, think about all the intersections of roles that you have, or any leader of an organization, you've got all these different circles. And the point is they all overlap and you're in the middle of them. And so at certain times, one circle might be larger and the other might be slightly smaller because you're just having to hustle this week because you've got a massive thing you got to close, right? And so you're kind of slightly not able to show up with as much presence as you would as a father. And the other week, you're like, okay, great, I'm actually going to really prioritize this because I know that one of my girls is going through a challenge, whatever.
Yeah.
So the point is, like, we are always these things. We are multiple things. There's this great, it's I am legion, I contain multitudes, right? And that's Walt Whitman, I think. And it's this idea that, we're legion. We're literally multiple selves. So it's I am ... and then every single role that you play in life. And we need the spreadsheets. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-spreadsheet, but the spreadsheets come underneath the Venn diagram. They're the operational model. You still need to have a strategy. But strategy for me is an amusing hypothesis. As Dr. Jason Fox would say, it's an amusing hypothesis. Cool, well, we think this is the way we're going to go. We're going to take intentional action in this direction. But we didn't see the pandemic coming, or we didn't see this cataclysm coming, or we didn't see this big job being pulled up.
Or this rug get pulled out.
And mate, to come back to like Roger Federer, first of all, what a legend.
Yeah.
This guy just seems so humble, and it's just almost impossible to not like him. Even if you're a big Nadal fan, or Djokovic or something, right?
Well, you respect these.
So yes, the question is like, let's have a look at that. And I want to share some work here from David Epstein. He wrote a great book called Range, which I would commend to anyone listening. It's fantastic because it's learning. David Epstein.
Range.
Range. And subtitle is Why Generalists Thrive in a Hyper-Specialized World. And I would self-identify as an aspiring deep generalist. And keep the word aspiring wherever you can. Because as soon as you're like, I've made it. The kind of expert paradox triggers, and then you're like, I don't need to do as much learning because I'm being paid for my knowledge.
Dying.
100%. Yeah, totally. Yeah, the limbs start getting clipped up again. But he starts that book, chapter 1, and it's literally Roger and Tiger. And he talks about Roger Federer and his development into becoming the world's greatest tennis player, now arguable, Serena Williams might actually hold that title. And, Tiger Woods. Right. And so Roger grew up with range. He actually played multiple sports for most of his childhood. And it could have gone either way. I can't remember the other sport that he was world class in, but he chose tennis at 20, really full time, you know. Tiger Woods, taught by his father, I'd say a pretty rigorous way, maybe intense way, like, you're going to be a golf superstar, specialized from the beginning. And I think we can just look at who these two people have become as human beings, as husbands, right? Without passing too much judgment. But if you look at those two, you'd say one of them clearly is a better role model. Why? And I think David's hypothesis, without, putting words in his mouth, is that because one has a range of experiences. They are more of a Venn diagram. They have more perspectives to take to come full circle.
More circles in there.
You've traveled more, you speak more language, you understand this. So you're not just this one thing. And that means if you take that thing away, who are you? You've got nothing left. It's one of the big challenges that we're finding, I think, in the modern world. This is the call for constant reinvention, constant evolution, constant learning, right? As that underpinning superpower. So that Roger, I love that you brought up Roger Federer. Right? Because I feel like his journey is actually something we can pay attention to in the way that we design our learning systems, maybe even the way we design our organizations. Rather than taking just the technical skill that's important for that person's role, give them something radically different to learn. Go to an art class if you can't draw. And literally, I think this is the way that we become better rounded people. And to close out this mini rant, which I feel is like most of the answers, it's, if you want to be interesting, be interested. The most interesting people are the ones that ask the most questions, that actually have kind of had the most curiosity across their lifespan. And so tragically, I think what we do is that the legacy schooling systems that we've all been through, they actually prune away part of our curiosity. We stop asking questions because we kind of learn the hidden grammar, which is you have to know the right answer. And so we go to convergent thinking instead of divergent thinking. We have to relearn that through very expensive executive programs at Stanford. That's kind of to get back out into that creative space. So that whole piece. But I'm really into this. How do you build out the Venn diagram in all of us? And how do we think multidimensionally? If we were to just pass, do a little self-assessment. How are you doing cognitively? How are you doing socially? How are you doing emotionally? How are you doing spiritually? And how are you doing physically? All those things matter if we're talking performance in anything beyond the most basic cognitive task, which increasingly is what work will be for all of us.
This was like, I love it. I think I want to touch on a few things in there, which I really want to expand on. And you mentioned the comment. I mean, you said the giraffe, the elephant, and it's an Albert Einstein quote too. The ability, why are we judging a fish's ability to climb a tree, sort of thing.
Yes, it's taken from him. Yeah.
When you apply that to learning in school, and then you talk about the Venn diagrams, and we use the Roger Federer and Tiger Woods example. Andre Agassi might be another one if you think about how he was brought up. That book's an amazing book, by the way.
I haven't read it yet. No, I've heard it.
But the thought that's going through my mind now, and the question that I want to ask is, you talked about art, going and doing an art school if you're not such a good drawer, and building the opportunity to learn things that you're not so strong in within organisations. Let's bring this back to a business / schooling perspective. If you're sending someone off to do an art course, do they need to be interested in drawing? Do they need to have a passion about the drawing? Or do we just do it so we can get more circles on our Venn diagram? Do you know what I mean?
More circles equals better.
That's what I'm saying. Well, because if we add to that Venn diagram and we build the learnings that we go through, it creates us. And you never know, right? You might go and do that art course and just end up loving art, like I did with the science thing. So that's kind of my point. Is you often hear, and it's something that you see on TikTok, Twitter, all the social medias, follow your passion. Steve Jobs comes out and he goes, if you don't love what you do, you can't connect the dots, all this sort of stuff. Is it passion that we need to cultivate in the schooling system or in the business world? Or is it literally adding more layers to who you are as a human?
Great question, Daniel. That's really interesting. A couple of things come up for me. One is, let's start with schools and then go to business. Yep. So in education systems, some of this research will show us that 1 in 3 young people change. They don't change. They choose their subjects in senior secondary away from things that make them feel truly alive, things they love to do, for things they think will give them a better score. Yeah. And that to me is system failure. Because that's a those choices are being made based on this hidden grammar around what success is and who you want to be. And so that's the first thing I would say. It's like, I like the Ikigai model, which I don't know if you've seen before, right?
I think I got the book on here.
I bet you do. Yeah, well, it's wonderful. And I remember seeing that like years and years ago before the books came out. Just saw someone put it up on Twitter. I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. And so sorry, when we talk about the book, it's a philosophy, isn't it?
It's a philosophy, but there's a book that people have codified it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And just so that people understand what Ikigai is, it's Japanese for purpose, or la raison d'être in French. What's our reason for being? And it's, what are you good at? What can you get paid to do? And that's your profession. It's like, what are you good at? What do you love? That's your passion. And then it's like, what can you get paid to do? And what does the world need? That might be a vocation. And then what do you love to do? And what does the world need? And that's your mission. And so in the center of that is Ikigai. It's your purpose. And so then we delve into a conversation around lifestyle design or career design, right? Particularly important for young people, because the hyper-engaged, not disengaged, hyper-engaged zillennials and Gen Alphas that will come into the workforce in the business sense, they have a higher expectation for doing interesting work. They don't want to kind of plod along for 16 years and then get it from. It's not happening. And so it's this career web, the idea. Everyone is a personal brand. All of that's going on. Yeah. And then I think your question to how do we be? Is it just about adding an extra circle and a business
that's from a layer perspective?
Yeah, no, I get that. So do you have to love art to go to an art class, or does it have to be a passion? Absolutely not, because it took me a long time to work this out. Right, for a long time, I was very much in the, I would say, unconsciously privileged position of saying it's about doing what you love. Do what you love, young people. Go that way. And yeah, it's that, but that is such a privileged thing to say.
Yeah. If I go and play PlayStation all day long, or
Well, that's true too. But also, if you're coming from poverty, or if I think about some of the young people with whom I've worked, or I've been in like a learning teaching relationship with, I say, hey, just do what you love. And they're coming from a place where there's intergenerational unemployment, and they're like, well, I might love to do this thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, they don't have the social capital or the financial capital.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd love to go to Harvard. Okay, great. So, I think we've got to be careful when we take the kind of Steve Jobs thing.
Can I jump in there for one thing?
Yeah.
I'm reading the book Psychology of Money at the moment.
Oh, okay, interesting. I haven't heard of it. Yeah.
It's a new one out there. It's quite interesting. It gives you a bit more of perspective of money and where it came from and how everyone perceives it, right?
Yeah.
And so when you talk about it comes from a position of what did you say? Position of privilege.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost the word there for a sec. Position of privilege. There was an example within this book in the first couple of chapters where they were talking about Nike and the sweatshops, right? And so how in America there was this big uproar of, sweatshops and people getting paid $2 an hour and it's slave labor and all the above, and rightly so, right? From that position of privilege, that's not the way we want to treat. Mm-hmm. And then what actually shook everyone to the core was when it was a young Taiwanese boy come out and said, well, actually, that sweatshop for my auntie was the best thing that ever happened to her, because before that, she was a prostitute. That sweatshop took her away from from having to sell her body for a living, to being able to respect herself in a role. So now you're taking away our opportunity to elevate ourselves out of our poverty-stricken lives. And I'm not condoning, I'm not enforcing and promoting sweatshops, but it's about perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when you say things come from privilege, we really need to consider that whenever we think about it. And
Absolutely.
So carry on if I cut you off.
No, that was really, that's great. I just want to reflect on what you've just said, because I think it's really profound. I think what we need to be conscious of is that this is nuance. This is complex. Yeah. It's not black and white. Yeah, it's hard because it's not one or the other. This is the thing. It's like there's a post-dual view to this. So it's not do what you love. Yeah. So we'll say that. And this is why Ikigai is so powerful, because the whole idea that it's a Venn diagram. I love Venn diagrams. I'm a nerd for the Venn diagram.
Yeah. I've seen a few of your YouTube.
Oh mate, it's all Venn diagrams. It's all just colourful circles. That's all I do. That's all I do. On top of each other.
Do you colour in the lines or do you go out the lines?
Oh no, out the lines. But really, this could be a bit emergent and stuff. But this idea, it's like, how do you actually design your life forward? And so, yes, do what you love. Yes, try to find your passion and go for it. Absolutely. But it's bad advice to young people to say, find your passion and go for it. It's better advice to say, actually, what would be a meaningful life for you? What might be your purpose is a better question. The same reason that we shouldn't say happiness. It's like, the purpose of life is to be happy. I disagree. It's not. The purpose of life is to create meaning, right? Create meaning in community, with others, do good work, build new businesses, create new products and services. Do something really interesting and kind of dangerous, add value. Because then guess what? If you do that well, happiness will ensue. You can't pursue happiness. It can only be a byproduct of a life well lived. That's my view. And, more smart philosophical people like Bertrand Russell say the same thing. You can't pursue success. You cannot pursue success because you never arrive. You get your first 100 million, great. But now I'm like hanging with billionaires, so now I'm poor. And then, and we know the psychology of money. You'll see this in the book, of course, right? It's like, we relativize so quickly. People that are super wealthy but hang around with wealthier friends feel poor, feel less happy. than someone that objectively has got far less financial resources, but actually feels like they're in it. But so there's all these kinds of crazy things that go on in this space. But so this idea of it's like create your purpose. Don't even find your purpose. It's not out there to be found. It's through experimentation that perhaps we kind of unfold all these different parts of who we are.
Yep.
What can we do? What do we love to do? And then, what do we need to know? And the last thing I'd say is this, like, do what you love is one perspective. The other is love what you do. And so one thing that has always stuck with me is if you've got two people, then they're chiseling stone, right? And you go past one person and you say, hey, what are you doing? And they say, can't you see I'm chiseling some stone? You're like, oh, okay. You walk past and the second person say, what are you doing? And say, well, I'm building a cathedral.
Yeah.
And so that's called cathedral thinking. And that is powerful because what you've realized is that you're loving what you do. You realize that you're in service of something greater than yourself. That's a spiritual question. It's transcendent. It's the idea I'm part of something bigger than me. The other study that I love comes out of hospitals and work in the health sector, where it was the same question asked of cleaners. And some cleaners would say, I'm a cleaner at a hospital. And another group would say, I help people heal. I help people on their journey. And that second group would do things like change the pictures on the walls in the ICU so that when this person woke up, there was a new picture for them. Put fresh flowers and cleaning. Yeah. But their orientation towards what they did came from a place of love. Absolutely. And that, so when we talk about human-centered organizations and the business world that we want to create, that's, I think, what we're trying to create here is this idea of, yes, you want to have a skill set. You don't want to be, you want to have attunement, I think, Daniel. Yeah. You don't want to be like a terrible musician trying to go and become a professional musician. You know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to be an NBA basketball player because I'm 5'9". Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So like, but you might. No. So there's all of these kinds of things in this nuanced conversation, but really it's what's a life well lived is the big question. And especially when we think about in a business sense, from time to time, we should be a bit more radical when we think about our own growth and development as a learning organization. What don't we know? What blind spots can we try to now find? And sometimes failing publicly is the best thing for you, especially if you're C-suite, right? Because you're probably used to being really capable. So what scares the living daylights out of you? Have you tried that recently? And this is why I love language learning as adults, right? Because speaking another language means you have to fail in public time in really embarrassing ways. And mate, I've shared a few stories on TED Talk, but mate, I got some real shockers. Of like, oh, okay, that was the word.
Well, you got the pregnant story? Was that the?
That's the Spanish one I've done before. Embarazado is a false cognate. So it's false friend. And I thought, I think it's probably the same in Brazilian. It's like, so, you go and you're trying to learn Spanish and you say, oh, estoy muy embarazado, which, you think means I'm really embarrassed because it means I'm really pregnant. Yeah. And of course, your man walking around, people go like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. But I've got all sorts of one from all different language contexts. I thought the word for book and vagina in Pidgin Jota is very similar. I'll just leave it there. That's been a real faux pas.
I'm going to read.
And you just, mate. And you're like, oh,
deep diving now.
I'm like teaching a class and everyone's like, eyes are wide open.
Hold on. Yep.
But so that part for me, because I think what that does, when you are going and doing art and you feel that you're not an artist, what that does is it shifts your orientation. You become more of a beginner. You have to get more comfortable with discomfort. And great learning organizations in business are comfortable with discomfort. They can navigate ambiguity because they know that actually it's progression. This is the old fixed growth mindset work of Carol Dweck, right? Which has been around for a long time and I think is now being iterated in some ways as well. So,
yeah, I'm a firm believer if you're moving into a leadership role or into C-suite role or whatever it might be, you're choosing stress, right? You're choosing the option of living every day with ambiguity, living every day with the unknown. That becomes your new reality, right? So your new reality is being comfortable with the unknown, and you almost forget what it's like to live any other way. I do want to touch back, and we've talked about success, and we've talked about schooling, and we can define success, and I'm really interested in what is the responsibility of a school when it comes to let's cut back a bit. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution and the way it was set up so that we could go out and we could help grow the world in a sense, from cars to all the above. And that's the era that we went through.
Yeah.
Now we're in the world of what is essential services that are super important. Say nursing, what else is there? Policing. And we know for a fact that they're struggling with nurses, with getting police on board and recruitment and that sort of space. Is it a school's responsibility to educate for success in roles that will help the environment and the community, or is it a school's responsibility to educate in a way that fosters entrepreneurship and other opportunities? And you talked about the brand, everyone becoming their own brand, and or does it fall into the Venn diagram of it's a school's responsibility to do all the above?
Gee, sounds like there's a lot of responsibility on schools, Daniel. That's how I reflected your question, mate.
I think it starts with education. I think this is...
I agree. So, of course, I agree with your premise. Right. But what I would say is it's a shared responsibility. This is not... So I'd say it's accurate but incomplete. This is a community responsibility. This is a societal responsibility.
Very true.
Because if we put it all on schools again, schools have got a lot on their plates, right? And the next thing is, okay, we're going to add this. We're not good at strategy in big education systems. We add things, we don't subtract. And there's the power that comes from doing less, right? And I think good strategy, when I step into that strategic space, it's actually about subtraction. It's about what not to do as well as what to do through the intentional action. And so, schools, the role of a school, I mean, there's so many ways to frame this, individual fulfillment for collective well-being. That's a pretty good frame that you could use. You could also talk about, collective thriving and individual empowerment. The idea here is that we need to move from standardization to personalization. And so that every young person is kind of on their own journey. Because if you've got someone that really wants to be a nurse, they should be fully supported to discover that's the case. But simultaneously, if you've got someone that kind of really doesn't like they're kind of a bit of a different thinker, they want to be in enterprise or in entrepreneur, they want a startup, we should be supporting that too. So I don't think these things are either or propositions. But the big shift here, absolutely, mate, is from schools, and even the word school, I think we're not saying in 30 years, right? I think it's a different word. It's probably learning ecosystems, the learning village. It's the hub. It's the learning hub, right? That's from birth to, grave. Right? So like young kids are there in the morning, etc., with the elders, with 60, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, because that's really good for cognition as well with them. There's some really great studies looking at that when you put an early year setting in a nursing home. Amazing stuff, right? That's interesting system design, right? And so I think it's the shift from schools to learning ecosystem. And that means the role of parents, the role of industry, the role of community and non-profit sector, and yes, the role of formal education. Because the future of learning is informal, non-formal, and formal convergence. It's social, emotional, and academic converged. Like this idea of literally, don't want to say Venn diagram again, but I will. Venn diagram. It's like bringing back together these aspects and not saying that's a school's responsibility and that's a parent's responsibility. That kind of division as a spreadsheet is antithetical to what we know about how systems work. Systems are all about interrelatedness, profound interrelatedness, interconnectedness. And so, and I need to make an economic point here, right? Because I'm an amateur economist, right? I care really interestingly about business models, the way that's evolving. And, I've been around the B Corp movement as well, for example, triple bottom line, ESG, all this stuff that's really powerful. And yet we're still in this space where stakeholder capitalism, I think, is kind of in its late stage. We're going to have to see some kind of significant step into whatever Mariana Mazzucato, who's at UCL as a professor of economics, she says we need a moonshot to changing capitalism. Because I don't think we're going to bring back communism. I don't think that's going to work. And socialism, that's also, that's kind of returning to the past. Really, it's like, what's the evolution of a more humane way of doing capital investing, right? And using capital in service of human flourishing. Social foundation, whilst also paying attention to the ecological ceiling. And that's the donut economic model from Professor Kate Raworth at Oxford University. And so those are the new models, right? Because again, simultaneously, if you think we can have externalities in a business model, we're kidding ourselves. What are we talking about? I'm like, oh, I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. Economic activity is good. I'm going to pollute over here, but we're going to actually not include that pollution on our P&L, whatever, right? On our assets. Yeah. And that's not how systems work, as we are discovering with all of the crises that we're seeing around our world, climate, social cohesion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the future of business is really interesting. It's purpose-oriented and it's profit with purpose. It's not like everything's non-profit. No, I feel like there's this really powerful thing with enterprise when you're on the line, and you and I are both in private industry. It's kind of like you got to come up with something. You've got to and I think that it's really powerful, an innovation engine. And so how do you use the power of business to kind of get to that? But it means having a more holistic worldview. I think Patagonia has taken some pretty amazing steps into that, making Earth the shareholder of the company. I mean, that's probably a pretty big step. But you know what? I think we'll be judged by history to be absolutely right. And that maybe we've stayed in this kind of late stage space for too long. Like if we're not thinking about the economic, the social, the governance parts of our business models, we're also not paying attention to what maybe the planet is saying, and increasingly what the marketplace is saying. Purpose-oriented businesses actually outperform non-purpose-oriented businesses. And if you look at the data financially, even though they're meant to be doing more complex stuff and actually, paying their employees more. To your point around, sweatshops. I mean, Amazon's a great example of this. I mean, how much money does Bezos actually need? Do you know what I mean? Same with Elon. Like, sure, I'm all for a bit of philanthrocapitalism, but do we have to rely on a single individual to kind of save us from ourselves? I'm not so sure about that. I reckon we've got enough smart people working in businesses, working in the kind of third sector and social sector, that we can kind of think pretty cleverly about how we partner in a public-private way to kind of transform stuff. So to come full circle, it's like, is it the responsibility of schools? Yes. And the responsibility of companies, and the responsibility of community centers, and the responsibility of families. And so that move from different institutions where we have a pretty, these big gaps that you have to leap across in transition, early years to primary, primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, tertiary to workforce or vocational workforce. We just got to get rid of all those big jumps and just think of it as an ecosystem where, you have a human being, a person that's multidimensional. They're learning really rigorously, they're being challenged, but they're also being supported socially and emotionally to kind of become this holistic individual that can be a great employee, can be a great entrepreneur, can be a job taker and a job maker, if we want to use some of the political language, right? And a job keeper, and it's all about jobs. And I'm all like pro-job, don't get me wrong. But it's also like job is maybe the primary part of human flourishing. But a lot of people have jobs, and we still, have the greatest burden of disease in our world is mental health, and increasingly depression and anxiety. And this is we're talking $1 trillion impacts here. And so, what are we doing about that? So maybe we shouldn't just say job, we should say, like good life keeper. Life satisfaction. So employment skills, and also social skills, and also social support. I mean, this might sound a bit utopian, but this is the vision we have to have for the future.
Yeah, correct.
Because otherwise we're going to end up in a different place. More social fragmentation, more international conflict, more emergency crisis settings when climate starts, the planet starting to kick us off in some ways, right? And, some of us might want to go to Mars. And I'm a big space nerd, so I'm really excited in that space. And we can learn a lot about space, from space work, about, Adelaide, we have the Australian Space Centre. That's amazing. But it's also like, what are we going to do for the planet? And how do we play, it's not just the technologies we need, it's the shift in systems, I think, as well.
I'm sorry to say this, but you're on a tight time frame.
What is time? It will endure, we will have long after we're gone.
We have to start thinking about wrapping up at the moment. So I have about 15 questions that I didn't ask. So maybe we can maybe we can do a round 2 in the future. So I'm going to wrap up the podcast now.
Great.
And before we jump into some quick fire questions, I asked you on the phone a couple of weeks ago when we did chat, or a week or so ago when we had a chat.
Yeah.
I said, if you had to ask yourself 1 or 2 questions, what question would you ask yourself? And you said to me, what advice would my 65-year-old self say to me now? Can you answer that question? What advice would your 65-year-old self say to you now?
I'm waiting for my 65-year-old self to answer it. But I feel like Louka Parry at 65 would say something like, remember the small things and remember what truly matters, especially as the world gets faster. I think that would be it. Like, it'd be pay more attention to where you actually are. Particularly in a dopamine loop-fed world, right? It's the age of distraction, the extraction economy. It's pretty hard to do that. So, yeah. I think it's, trust yourself. Probably is always a good advice from an older self. So, trust yourself. You're doing okay. Oh, hey, how's this one? Okay, this is what it might be. It's you have everything you already need. That really resonates. Like, all right, great. And then from that place of fullness and completeness, do really interesting things, meaningful things, maybe. I hope.
All the above. Trust yourself is the big one.
Trust yourself.
That's huge. Right, we're going to jump into some quick fire questions to wrap up. What are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading about 10 books.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same. It's a
tricky one. I would say I'm reading Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
The Parallel Sayings, which is actually about looking at the words of Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu, and Krishna, and thinking like what underpins all religions. That's an interesting question as well. And then I'm also reading a lot of education books.
Okay. Very good
stuff.
If you, from a self-development point of view, could recommend a book to someone, what book would come to mind?
Just one.
There's so many, but what's one that you've gifted the most?
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Oh, it's my favourite book of all time.
Of course, mate.
Yeah.
On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. And the last one is actually Designing Your Life, which is by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, who are colleagues at Stanford. And it was a lifestyle design course that they used to give to Stanford students, still give to Stanford students. And that book, I swear, I've recommended to about 50 people and they've all bought it because it's back to our Ikigai conversation. It's how do you design your life for, how do you use design thinking for your life, like around your career trajectory or around decisions you might be making. Odyssey planning is one of my favorite tools ever and I use it all the time. Okay. It's just a really beautiful way.
What was the book again?
Designing Your Life. Bill Burnett, Dave Evans.
We'll put him in the show notes.
Great.
Do you listen to any other podcasts?
I used to. At the moment, I'm almost too much in a creation space. Okay. Because I've just been consuming so much knowledge for so long as an educator. But I would say my favorite, Hidden Brain, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, great.
Aubrey Marcus podcast, I really like. That's interesting, kind of cutting edge spirituality stuff. I used to love TED Radio Hour as well. Yeah. Oh, I spent a lot of years listening to that too. Yeah.
Creating Synergy is now your favourite, which
is
good.
That's right. I don't know about if this is the quality. I don't know, mate. If it's me. Nah, that's cool.
What's one lesson that's taking you the longest to learn?
Maybe that there's not one lesson. I don't know. It's that actually, do you know what it is? It's that life is really simple. It's just be curious, be honest, and be kind.
Yeah, I love
that's it. That's kind of what I'm learning.
Yeah, when you overcomplicate things.
Oh my God, so much. The mind,
the story we tell ourselves.
Yeah, we make things complicated. Exactly, and that's the way. That's the most important story we ever hear. By the way, it's the one that we are telling ourselves consistently. And if we can change that, I think it unlocks our true potential. Go beyond it even.
So you could invite 3 people for dinner. Who would they be?
Well, yeah, when I answer that question, I think who's the most influential person ever, and it's probably the spiritual master, like be Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Jesus. That would be kind of an interesting chat, but I actually think it would be my yaya, my grandma, and my older self, because they're my elders that I call upon. Really, the ancestors that have passed on. And also I need that old Louka just to give me that simple answer. Yeah. That would be an interesting conversation.
That's true. Oh, that's so interesting. That's made me think about if that could actually come to reality, I'd go back and learn Italian and invite my grandparents back. Oh, man. I never even thought about it like that. That's amazing.
Never too late, mate. It's never too late. Brain plasticity. It's all really
Yeah, well, it's definitely on the bucket list.
Andare, see?
Yeah. What's some of the best advice you've ever received?
It's actually that. Somebody said to me, a dear friend who's an amazing social entrepreneur in India, has changed millions of lives, actually. He said, and I've already said this, but he said, imagine why don't you just start with the assumption that you already have everything you'll ever need? And so that's that piece around abundance as opposed to scarcity. And if we can create an abundance mindset in our leaders, in our business work, through our schools, in our world, I think we can actually create a better future for our grandkids. So yeah, you have everything you already need.
I love that. I feel like there's 10,000 questions I've got to stop myself from asking. If you had access to a time machine, where would you go?
I would actually go to 2100 and I'd see what we've created and invented. What the schooling
system looks like.
Absolutely. What the schooling system looks like, what our business models look like, what technologies are at play. And I would bring back those technologies. And I think the most important one is the one that we are still missing today, is it's not just converging tech, it's human tech. How do we develop and cultivate the type of capabilities, type of character, type of human beings that help us live in a more peaceful, compassionate way with all life around us, not just each other, but also, the ecologies that sustain us.
Yeah.
I think that I'm very curious. And as a futurist, I'm always interested in what the speculation of that could look like.
If your house was on fire, your family, your pets, everyone, they're all safe, you could run back in and grab one thing, what would it be?
Be my guitar.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You play music as well?
Yeah.
Just to add to the neural plasticity.
Yeah, totally, mate. Well, there's a connection between mathematical and musical. Yeah, I do. And actually, when my grandma died, she gave us all $1,000, the grandkids.
Yeah.
And I bought a guitar, a beautiful Taylor, 3/4 guitar with that. And I'm more of a pianist than a guitarist, but it's a beautiful guitar. So
you play piano as well?
Well, piano's the bass instrument. If you learn piano, you're set.
And a marathon runner and all the above.
Well, a couple of weeks out from that. So yeah, looking forward to trying to struggle over that line.
Is there anything you don't do?
Draw, mate. I don't. The drawing class freaks me out. Yeah.
So if you had one superhero power, what would it be?
It would be to help people see how powerful they truly can be in a positive way.
You don't want the negative one.
No, it's like, I'm powerful. I will not destroy the world.
Take over the world.
I had to add that at the end. I was like, that's not going to fly.
And I love this one. Your best dad joke. Shit joke.
It's a terrible joke. Oh, look, I'm yet to become a dad, so I feel like I haven't entered this world fully yet. But what kind of peas are a dad's favorite?
What kind of peas are a dad's favorite?
Peas and quiet.
Yes, it's so true.
You can speak to that, mate. You can speak to that.
Yes, brilliant. Look, thank you so much for your time today. I'm a bit bummed we couldn't go for 2 or 3 hours with this one.
We really could have. We could have double clicked on a few things.
It's like we'll see if we can touch base and do a part 2 next year sometime. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all that you're doing in this space. I really believe your thought leadership and your passion around what you're doing, especially within the schooling system and setting up the future in a better way, is like it's world leading, and no wonder why you're getting asked to go around the world and speak and do this sort of stuff. You're really passionate about it and absolutely amazing. Your message is really strong, and I'm going to continue watching from the sidelines as a fan. So kudos to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Daniel, mate, thanks for a wonderful conversation. You've absolutely convinced me long form is the way to go.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's been a delight. Thank you.
Where can we find you? Where can we follow you?
Well, I have to say I'm both lucky and cursed to have a unique name combination. So Louka Parry, Greek Welsh. Yeah. So it's Louka Parry. And if you put that into any search thing, you'll find a bunch of
check out his website.
Moderately interesting things I'm working on. Yeah. So, and the learningfuture.com is kind of the work we do with learning systems and a little bit in the innovation organization space too.
Which we didn't even really touch on today. So I'm so sorry, but I'd love to talk to you about that and what you're doing in that space as well.
Mate, the most interesting thing is actually who we are.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I'm a big proponent for big talk, not small talk.
Yeah.
And I could tell you all the stuff, the cool projects we're working on and the system change and transformation agenda and stuff. And that's all really interesting. But I really just like the way you've asked the questions as well, because it's been such a deep self conversation. And like, this is the holding of space, the generative listening, because then new questions emerge, right? I think you're a fantastic interviewer. I think that's really clear.
Thank you very much. I'll take payment. I'll take payment after. Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for coming and listening in. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to the podcast all. You can check out the show notes if there was anything of interest to you and find out more about us at synergyiq.com.au. I am going to ask, though, if you did like the podcast, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you could subscribe, rate, and review. And if you didn't like it, that's all right too. There's no need to do anything. Take care, guys. All the best.